You'll want to get your Bible out because we're going to study this today. I'll just start you out, though, with a quick story because we're doing baptisms here coming up soon. There was a Scottish, and I love Scottish guys because I love the Scottish brogue, right? And so he was doing baptisms. He's out there, and he's out in the river, right? And he's baptizing people. He sees the town drunk coming, right? And the town drunk is there, and he says, "Hey there, man, have you found Jesus?" And the guy goes, "What?" Like this. He says, "Do you want to find Jesus?" And he says, and the guy's like, "I don't know." And so he wanders over there, and the guy grabs him, he takes him, and he just dunks him underwater, pulls him back up, and says, "Did you find Jesus there, man?" And the guy, just trying to wipe it. "No, I didn't see Jesus. I didn't find Jesus." He goes, "You need to find Jesus." He puts him down underwater, holds him down like 3, 4, 5, struggling around, pulls him up. And "Did you find Jesus, man?" No, I didn't find Jesus. He says, "You got to find Jesus." And he puts him underwater, and he holds him down there 10, 15, 25 seconds, 30 seconds. Finally, the guy comes, says, "Did you find Jesus?" He goes, "Are you sure this is where he went in?" I don't know. Is it sure? We've had kind of some fun. You had the feeding of the 5,000 last week with Jim, and so that's pretty cool. I'll tell you, miracle-wise, the feeding of the 5,000 is one of the biggest miracles you ever. I was looking to see how many people. There were probably 25 to 30,000 people at the feeding of the 5,000 that actually received food. And we're not talking about like they watched the feeding of the 5,000. They were active participants in the actual miracle. Like they ate food that didn't exist 30 seconds ago, right? Like they experienced that. You're talking the United Center in Chicago where the Bulls play, that holds like 23,500, right? So it's more people than that. Fill up the United Center. That's how many people were there, witnessed God do this thing. You're like, wow, Jesus must have just been like a rock star, right? After something like that, imagine that you showed up to the United Center, the place is packed, and somebody just out of nowhere, picks somebody's like hot dog and Coke and multiplies it out into like for everybody to go out of nothing, and you're like, wow, this is incredible. It is incredible, and we see it's incredible in the Bible as well, because if you look at John chapter 6, watch what happens after this. We're going to start a little bit before our text today. In verse 14, it says, "After the people saw the sign Jesus performed." So after the people watched this, after the people experienced this, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Verse 15, watch this. "Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself." Did you hear what just happened? After the feeding of the 5,000, this crowd of 25 to 30,000 people have made a decision that they are going to kidnap Jesus, take him to Jerusalem, and force him to be their king. That's what's going to happen. They're going to make him king by force. Jesus has to get out of this situation because he doesn't want anything to do with this. Why do they want to make him king by force? Because Jesus fed their belly. Jesus gave them what they want. Are they going to Jesus to make him king by force so that they can live under the authority of his kingship? No. Why do they want to make him king? They want to make him king so that they can have breakfast tomorrow made out of nothing, right? They wanted to make him king so that Jesus can provide and give them, what is this called? Today it's called the prosperity gospel, right? It's the prosperity gospel. The prosperity gospel is huge. Go to Joel Osteen's church. It's humongous. Why? Because it's all about God will give you what you want. God's going to give you what you want. You want to eat? God will give it to you. God will give it. That's the prosperity gospel. And the people in this time, after the feeding of the 5,000, they're all about the prosperity gospel. They're coming in crowds, 30,000 people. But is anyone transformed by the gospel? Is anybody willing to submit themselves to Jesus as the real king? No. So we got a problem. Even the disciples, actually, Actually, let me find this for you. Look at Mark chapter 6, if you got Mark chapter 6. This is a parallel passage of what we're going to read today that has to do with the Walkin On Water. We're going to talk about walking on water today. The parallel passage, it says this in Mark chapter 6, verse 51 and 52. It says this. It says, then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed. This is at the end of the story. They're completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. This is talking about the disciples. The disciples didn't even get it. It says they did not understand about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. In other words, the prosperity of the gospel, yes, God, we want you to be king so you will do what we want you to do. We want you to be our God in our image, what we want you to do. Feed me, give me, make me happy, provide for me. It's all about me. It's me focused. It says that that's what they got, and their hearts were hardened by that. A hard heart doesn't get you close to God. A hard heart doesn't get you close to God. And so they want to make him their king for their own fleshy reasons. Now, let me ask you this as well. Would you call the feeding of the 5,000 a pleasant event or a hard and trying event? We're pretty smart, right? It was a pleasant event, wasn't it? We wouldn't say, oh boy, that was rough. Boy, we had to eat all that fish and all that bread. You know, it wasn't a trying time. It was something good. It was pleasant. It was something we liked, right? The result of this pleasant thing that happened is a hardening of their heart. And yet we as people within the church, you and I, we're like, man, if things aren't going right, if things aren't good, if things aren't pleasant, God must be mad at me or something is wrong. That is not the case. That is not necessarily the case. The times we grow the most are not when God's just blessing us, right? It's when God is drawing us through something really, really hard, something scary. And boy, there's hardly anything more scary than being out on the water in the middle of a storm where you could drown. And that's what's about to happen here. So if you got your Bible, turn to John chapter 6. We're looking at verse 16, and we're going to follow along. So here's what it says. It says, when evening came, his disciples went down to the lake. There they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. Now I should tell you, this same story is talked about in Matthew. It's also talked about in Mark. And what we find is that Jesus sent them on this boat. They're not on that boat because they just decided to go, right? It says in Matthew 44, it says, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. Jesus commanded them to get onto this boat. So they're about to get into a boat where there's going to be a huge storm and they're going to experience terror. Is this because they did something wrong? No. Jesus leads people into storms. Jesus leads you and I into storms. Jesus leads you and I into things that can be terrifying because he doesn't want us to be these nominal people who are just all about the prosperity gospel, but he wants us to understand that he is the king and that he's in control of all things and that he's smarter than us and that he can control all this, right? His control and his kingship and his sovereignty and his omnipresence and his ability to oversee and knowing his love for us allows us to sit here and say, you know what, I'm okay with it being his way. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I might be nervous, but I'm okay with that. I'm all right. So watch this. It keeps going. It says a strong wind was blowing and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were frightened. But he said to them, it is I, don't be afraid. Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were headed. All right? If you got it, let's turn to that Matthew passage. Where are we in Matthew 14? because it's a little bit different story. It's the same story, but there's some added things that are in there that has to do with Peter hopping out of a boat, right? It says in verse 22 of chapter 14 of Matthew, it says, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat. Again, he's making them get in the boat. They're not making that choice on their own. He's forcing them into the storm. And he also is sending them without him. It says, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. And then Peter speaks up. He says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, and the wind died down, then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. Wow. Now, some of you might be saying this whole story here about Jesus on the boat and all this kind of stuff, or the storm and Jesus is on having a storm and they're on a boat. This sounds like deja vu, right? Doesn't it sound a little deja vu? Because earlier there's been this before. They was all in a boat, right? Jesus and the disciples, they're in a boat, and a big storm comes up. And what's Jesus doing? He's sleeping, right? And so what have they learned to do when there's a storm? They get Jesus and they wake him up, right? Whenever there's a storm, what do? You wake up Jesus, right? And he'll come up and he'll save the day. And so they're probably here. They're out on the boat, and there's a big storm coming, and Peter's going, I know what to do. I know. I'll get Jesus up. And he's like, where's Jesus? And John's like, hey, Jesus isn't here, right? Jesus sent us without him. And he's like, oh, crud. Now what do I do? Right? And so now they're terrified. So they're rowing. And they're rowing. And actually, when we look at the time that it takes, they end up rowing all night. It's like 3 to 6 o'clock in the morning. And remember, it was just getting dark before. They've rowed all night, and they're terrified. These are people that are on the water all the time. A bunch of these guys are fishermen. This is all they do. And they're struggling here, and they're like, man, this is bad. This is bad. What's going to happen? And so they're trying to figure it out. It says it's the fourth watch is what it describes, and that'd be 3 or so. But what's the problem? The problem is that there's this big storm, and there's no Jesus. That's the problem. The problem isn't there's a huge storm. The problem is that there's a huge trial. The problem isn't that there's rockiness in my life. The problem isn't that things are beating on me and I'm stressed and I'm nervous and I'm frustrated and I'm frightened. That's not the problem. The problem is that all this is happening to me and there's no Jesus. A great commentator, his name is Matthew Henry, and if you've read commentaries or you do any studying, you see him all the time. This is what he says. He says, the absence of Christ is the great aggravation of the troubles of Christians. It's not. We oftentimes look and we say, the great aggravation, the big problem in my life is I've got this problem. No, that's not the problem. The problem is the absence of Christ in the issue, because there's always going to be problems. Have you ever gone through a period of your life where there wasn't some kind of problem? No. There's always something going on. You're always a little bit short. You're always a little bit here. There's always somebody that's mad at you. There's always some strife here. There's always some work problem. There's always something. The issue is not let's clear all that out so that everything is hunky-dory. The problem for Christians is Christ in your boat? Because like they said at the Camp Manitoqua song that we used to sing when I was little, when Christ's on your boat, you can smile at the storm. Smile at the storm. Smile at the storm. With Christ on your boat, you can smile at the storm. Sailing home. I don't know. I like that song. It's a good song. Kinda. And so what are the disciples afraid of? So they see this, and what happens? They look out and they see what looks like a ghost. They think Jesus is a ghost. Why? Why do they think it's a ghost? Well, because something horrible is happening, and what comes with horrible things is ghosts, and also, as a general rule, people don't float, right? Only ghosts float, right? Ghosts, I have never seen a ghost, but if any of you had any ghost experience, ghosts can go on top of what? They float, right? They don't even touch the ground, right? They float. But people, they don't do that. Just giving you a straight skinny on this. People always sink. Always. Except this is, so is this a person? Is this a ghost? That's a ghost. And you know what? I'm scared of ghosts. They are scared of ghosts. The ghosts are going to bring something bad to us and do something horrible. So here's what it says. He's walking on the water. It says, when they had rowed 3 or 4 miles, they see Jesus and they are frightened. They're not frightened of the storm. They're frightened at Jesus now. And he says, it is I, don't be afraid. Then they were willing to take him into the boat. This fear that they have of Jesus. It reminds me of the book of Isaiah. There's a great passage in the book of Isaiah, chapter 6, verse 2, where Isaiah meets God. He sees God. There's this awe. And he's in the presence, and he says, woe is me, right? When you actually encounter God, and that's what's happening here. It's different than when they were feeding the 5,000. This is something completely different. They are seeing God in action. They're seeing somebody that is walking on water. That's a bigger miracle. That's even a bigger miracle, and they're freaking out. And so if you go back to Mark, I love the Mark passage, or not Mark, but the Matthew passage, Matthew 14. I love this. This is great. It says, Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, verse 27, it is I, don't be afraid. And Peter says this. Now, is Peter super brave? Not really. I mean, he's just a normal guy. He's a fisherman, but he's obviously scared out of his wits about this whole thing. And he says, Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you on the water. Now, when I first look at that, I think, man, that's pretty big. That's pretty gutsy, right? He must have a lot of faith, right? He must have a whole lot of faith that he's willing to do something like step out onto the water, right? Doesn't that take a lot of faith? But let me tell you something. When you are terrified, and some of you have been here, when you are terrified, when you don't know what you're going to do, when you are scared out of your mind, and you know that the only answer to that is Jesus, you will do whatever it takes to get as close to Jesus as possible. And I believe that Peter was not acting out of some kind of great faith. I think he was acting out of fear and saying, you know what, I am scared to death. And he says this, he doesn't say, I'm coming out. He says, if you will call me out, I want to come out to you. Can I come out to you? Can I be with you? I want to be with you. I'm scared out of my wits. I'm scared out of my mind. This is a horrible situation. I'm going to die. This boat could drop at any minute. But you can walk on water, and I know that you ain't sinking. Everything else could sink right now, and the safest place to be right now is out there. Because that's where Jesus is. The safest place to be is on the water. Within hand's grip of Jesus. I'd be much safer there. One of my favorite stories, I love this story. It's a story in the Old Testament about Daniel, and they're in the lion. They go in the fiery furnace, right? They get thrown into the fiery furnace, and there's 3 of them that are in there, and all of a sudden Jesus shows up in the furnace, right? They're having a little Bible study or something in there. I don't know what they was doing in there, but all of a sudden there was 3 of them, and then it's like, hey man, there was 3, and now there's 4, and one of them's real shiny, right? What's going on in there? So there's 4 of them in there, and you know what? The safest place to be was in that furnace. That was the safest place to be, was in the furnace. Though it was hot, Didn't feel hot to them. Why? They were with Jesus. See, when there are storms, the place you want to be is as close as humanly possible to Jesus. And when storms come, we do one of two things. You guys do one of two things. I do one of two things, right? Whether you're college age, high school age, just out of college, you're older, when bad things happen, when we are in a storm, we're going to do one of two things. We are going to run away from God and try to figure this out on our own, or we are going to run as fast as we can to Jesus. And that determines who you are. And that will determine your success in dealing with this storm. Am I running to Jesus, or am I running away and dealing with it on my own? How do we do that? We go a little bit further. Let's go back to John, because this is important. And I'm not going to go too much longer here. The next day, verse 22, the next day, the crowd that had stayed on the opposite shore of the lake realized that only one boat had been there and that Jesus had not entered it with his disciples, but that they had gone away alone. Then some boats from Tiberias landed near the place where the people had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. Once the crowd realized that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went to Capernaum in search of Jesus. So remember, Jesus escaped because they were going to try to make him king by force. Right? They were going to force him to be their king under their own pretenses and their own desires. And they see the boat leave with the disciples, but they see Jesus ain't on it. Right? So because they didn't see Jesus on there, they assume he's still on this side of the water. But he's not. And so when they find out he's not on this side of the water, they go, we got to go find this cat, right? Because he's going to be our king. We're going to make him king. And they go hunting for him. Well, they find him on the other side of the water, which is a little bizarre. They're like, hey, there was only one boat. How'd you get here? Right? And then it says this. It says, once the crowd realized that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went to Capernaum in search of Jesus. Verse 25, when they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, Rabbi, when did you get here? Like, how'd you get here? There's another boat, right? Jesus answered, very truly, I tell you, you are looking for me because you saw the signs I performed, not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God the Father has placed his seal of approval. Then they asked him, this is the crowd's attitude. This is the prosperity gospel. This is the attitude that you get with this. Of gimme, gimme, gimme. It's all about me. It's me focused. You exist to serve me, not I exist to serve you. That's the prosperity gospel. Watch what this says. It goes on. And it says, then he asked them, they said, what must we do to do the works God requires? Jesus answered, the work of God is this, to believe in the one who is sent. Not believe in the one you want it to be, but believe in who was actually sent. Believe in me, right? So they asked him, this is classic. What sign then will you give that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Our ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, and as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus said, very truly, I tell you, it is not Moses that gave you bread from heaven, but it is the Father who gives you bread. What just happened here? They come back after this. They find Jesus, and what do they want? It's next day. It's morning. They want breakfast, right? We had dinner last night, and it was completely free. You provided it all. Now we're back, and he says, oh, what do we got to do? Well, hey, our ancestors, they gave us manna. They gave us, it was there in the morning for us. You got it for us in the morning today? Right? Are they concerned with Jesus? This is the prosperity gospel. Is not giving us the true lordship of Jesus, that he is in charge of everything. What draws the disciples to become people who put their faith in him and say, Jesus, you are Lord? Fear. They are terrified. They go through a storm. Do the 30,000, do the 25,000, do the 5,000, did they go through a storm? No. They didn't go through a storm. And Jesus needs to draw them. And so what does he do to draw them to himself? To show them that I'm the king. I'm in charge. I control all things. And I have control of all this. You can trust me. I love you enough that I'll walk out on the water to save you. What does he do? He draws them into a storm. And he commanded them to go into that storm. Some of you are going through storms today. Actually, I know a lot of you. Most of you are going through storms today. We in our house are going through some storms, right? And here's the thing about storms. They're not pleasant. They're not fun. I'm like, man, this stinks. You know what? Everything would be better with my relationship with God if these storms would just go away. Isn't that right? Isn't that what you say, though? You say, boy, if God would just God, if you'll just calm this down, if you'll just give me what I want, if you'll just provide for this need, if you'll just give me, and you'll do what I want you to do, then I'll be able to serve you better. And that is not how it works with God. That's how the prosperity gospel will tell you it works. That's the way Joel Osteen will tell you it works, and he's wrong. Scripture teaches us that that's not how it works, that God is the king, he is the Lord, and it's us that submit to him. It's about him, not about us. And he had to get the disciples from one place to the other, and he does it through a storm. I'll tell you what, if you're going through a storm today, praise God, because God is drawing you to himself. God didn't give a storm to 25,000 people. 25,000 of them never went through a storm, right? Those that are the 5,000, they didn't go through it. You know what? But there were those that Jesus had chosen, those that he loved, those that he said, you know what? You're mine. You're mine. And you know, because you're mine, I'm going to make sure that you get it. I'm going to make sure that you become more like me. I'm going to make sure that you are transformed. And if I'm going to transform you, this is how I'm going to do it. I'm sending you into a storm. I'm sending you into a storm because I love you, because I care about you. And what do when you recognize you're in a storm? You get as close as possible to Jesus. Call him onto your boat. If you got to jump out of the boat to go out to him, go. Because the safest place in the storm you're in right now, whether it's financial, whether it's relational, whether it's emotional, whatever it is, the storm that you are in right now, the safest place, the place you want to run to right now, is that Jesus that is standing out there on the water, defying all nature. Run to him. Say, Jesus, may I come to you? And you know what his answer is? Come on out. Come on out. I'm ready for you. When you receive him into the ship, it says when they received him into the ship, it says that the boat was back on the shore immediately. Now, I don't know exactly what that means. There are some that say, well, that's just a figure of speech. I don't think so. I believe that once Jesus got into the boat, they were miles out. All of a sudden, they were instantaneously transported to the shore. Because it says it happened immediately. Right? When they got Jesus into the storm, when they said, yes, I get it. Yes, I understand it. Yes, I've learned the lesson here. What happened? I'm not saying this happens all the time, but in this particular case, it was over. They were out of the storm. He showed mercy. He said, you know what? We're not going to dilly-dally out here in the storm, right? It's wet. Why are we going to do this? You learned the thing that you needed to learn. And he draws them out, and it's immediate like that. In the storm, I want you to know that the storm is about obeying Jesus. It's not about disobedience. Now, that's not to say some of you aren't dealing with storms because of disobedience, right? Some of us, we go through storms because we went out and we stirred one up, right? Some of us, we said, you know what? I created this problem, right? And I get that. Some of us, we created the problems we're in. We created the struggles, and we're in the storm because we went out and we just started, we did what we had to do to create a storm. But I want you to know that a lot of times God leads us into storms on purpose because he's trying to lead us. We need to fear Jesus over our circumstances, though. When we're in a storm, don't be afraid of the storm. Afraid of being in the storm without Jesus, right? Afraid of being in the storm without Jesus. And once you're there and you realize Jesus is here, Jesus wants to, invite him into the boat. Invite him in. Say, yes, come into my boat because I want to be close to you. There's no safer place than to be where you are. And remember this, that Jesus is the master of both you and the boat and the water and all of this. He's the master of all of it. He's in control of all of it, right? Jesus is the master of it. You're not the master. You never were the master. We're not in a prosperity gospel church here. We're in a church that teaches the Bible, right? And so the Bible teaches us that we are in submission to God and that God runs the show. And we say, you know what, God, we'll do what you want us to do because you're smarter. My ideas could be all jacked up, right? Half the time my ideas are jacked up. Oh, God, I've got a great plan. This is what you should do. Really? You're that dumb, Dustin? Why don't you let me come up with the idea? Because I'm way smarter than you. You're an nincompoop, Dustin. You should listen to me. I'm smarter than you. When I was doing youth group a long time ago, my saying that I said all the time to my youth group kids, years and years and years, would be, God is really smart. That was the main point I wanted my kids from the time they became 6th graders through high school. I wanted them to get. God is really smart. We went to Mexico, muy inteligente. Right? Muy inteligente. God is very smart. Right? Remember this, that when the storm is over your head, when you look up and you see that the storm is over your head, know that Jesus is over the storm. Jesus is above the storm. It's below his feet. All the crashing of the waves and all that rough water and all that stuff that's scaring you, Jesus is on top of that. And he's on your side and he loves you. And all he's saying is, listen, I'm trying to teach you something. Come to me. Come to me. Come to me. You will be safe if you are with Jesus in the storm. Okay. Let's pray. God, I thank you for the opportunity for us to study your word, John 6 and Matthew 14. And you've got a lot of things. We're going through a lot of storms, God, as a church. And things are just bigger and bigger. And the more you bless us, God, the more you draw people in our midst, the more issues there are, the more struggles there are, the more relational issues there are. It's just all there, God. But these storms, we're not afraid of them because you are in the storm with us. God, you walk out in power. You walk out in strength, in control of every instance, every wave, every buffeting of the boat. You're in control of every one of them, God. And we choose as a church to put our faith in you. We choose to say, yes, we want to be with you. Even if that means going out on the water, even if that means stepping out of the boat, we will. Because it's safer to be with you. The closer we can be to you. Draw us unto yourself, God.